everyone, and welcome. Get ready to dive into the world of the Connectome. That's your brain's very own roadmap. And you guys sent in some really interesting stuff for this. Deep dive articles, research summaries, even website snippets. Should be fun. So by the end of this, you'll be a Connectome Pro, whether you're prepping for a big presentation, boning up on the latest neuroscience, or just, crazy curious about how that brain of yours works.
Yeah, it really is about figuring out how the brain is wired.
Exactly. But before we go too far, let's get the basics down. What exactly is a connectome? This UK Research and Innovation article explains it perfectly.
Well, it's not just one map. You've actually got two main types. The first one, the wired connectome, it's all about the actual pathways, the physical connections, like those neuronal highways where signals zip from neuron to neuron at the synapse.
Like the brain's own little telephone lines.
Exactly. But then there's this other type, the wireless connectome. That's about communication through chemical messengers, neuropeptides. They're super interesting because they go the distance. They're not limited to those direct wired connections.
So like a whole other level of communication happening up there. Wow, tell me more about this wireless connectome, like this research on the C. elegans worm. What's the deal with that?
Okay, get this. Scientists were able to map the entire wireless neuropeptide connectome in this tiny worm, a first for any animal. And what they found was this crazy vast network, these connections, super important for everything, how they move, how they eat, even how they socialize.
It's kind of mind-blowing, right? This seemingly simple creature with this crazy complex communication network makes you really appreciate the human brain, with its billions of neurons, each with thousands of connections. How do scientists even begin to map something that massive?
Well, that's where the Human Connectome Project comes in. Definitely ambitious.
Their website, I'm telling you, mind-blowing. They're looking at thousands of people using different brain scans, and get this, they're focusing on the entire lifespan, so not just about those young brains.
Nope, not at all. And that's what makes this research so important. By studying connectomes over a lifetime, from childhood to old age, we start to understand how the brain grows and changes. We can see those connections form when we're young, how they stay strong in adulthood, and sadly, how things like aging and disease can affect them.
So, like, watching the brain's wiring diagram as it evolves. Okay, so the Human Connectome Project, huge project. What specifically are they looking into?
Well, they have a bunch of smaller projects under that umbrella, like there's the Lifespan HCP, pretty self-explanatory. They're studying connectomes in people of different age groups.
Yeah.
And then there's connectomes related to human disease. That one dives into how those connections get changed because of different diseases.
And their website, they even have a whole section on HCP software. These are tools researchers can use so they can share all this mind-blowing data they're collecting.
It's actually a vital part of the whole project, this open source approach. It lets researchers around the world work together, analyze that data, and hopefully speed up those amazing discoveries.
Okay, so we know they are gathering tons of data, but what are they doing with it? Like, what kind of research is actually coming from the Human Connectome Project?
Well, they've published loads of research papers. Each one uses really advanced software to analyze different aspects of how the brain is connected. For instance, one study used this software called Connectome Workbench. With that, they created crazy detailed visualizations of these brain networks. Another study used something called BANDA to see if there was a connection between how the brain is wired and how well our brains work, things like memory and attention.
And it looks like they've got specific software just for processing the data from all those different brain scans. Like, they have the Connectome MR pipeline and the HCP MEG pipelines. Amazing how much they're learning.
It really is a gold mine of data. It's allowing researchers to really dig deep into specific areas. They've even released this whole software suite called Quenex. It lets them study those brain networks at an incredibly detailed level.
This is clearly a huge, complex project. But these maps, these connectomes, they're just the first step, right? We need to figure out how these connections translate into actual brain activity.
Exactly. That's where it gets really exciting. How do these intricate networks allow us to think, to feel, to behave the way we do?
This Nature article about the fly visual system, this one really blew my mind. It seems scientists are using connectomes to, get this, actually predict how the brain's going to respond, like in real time.
Oh, it's a game changer for sure. So in this study, they used the connectome of a fly, and they were able to predict accurately how neurons in its visual system would react to different things they saw.
Right.
We're going beyond just looking at maps. We're talking about the connectome as this dynamic, predictive tool.
So basically using this wiring diagram to see how the brain sees, that's incredible. And it makes me think about how this research can actually be used. The Human Connectome Project website, they mentioned a bunch of diseases they're looking into, things like Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, even depression. So what's the latest on that front? What are they finding?
Well, in Alzheimer's, for example, they're seeing this, well, sad but kind of fascinating, this pattern where the connections in areas of the brain that are super important for memory and thinking those connections get weaker. Like some of those essential pathways, they're breaking down.
So the connectome is like a window into what's actually happening in the brain when someone has Alzheimer's.
Exactly. And it's not just Alzheimer's, schizophrenia too. The research is showing changes in the connections between those parts of the brain that control how we perceive things, how we think, our emotions. This could be a big clue as to why people with schizophrenia, they experience the world so differently.
It's like every discovery leads to even more questions.
Fascinating.
So what about depression? Any noticeable patterns in the connectomes of people struggling with depression?
Well, definitely some interesting findings coming out. Studies suggest that folks with depression might have some changes in the connections between the areas of the brain that control mood and reward. Like that circuitry that helps us feel good and stay motivated. It's like it's not working the way it should.
This is mind-blowingly complex. But it also feels like we're on the edge of some really big breakthroughs in how we think about and treat these conditions.
No doubt. If we can understand how these diseases are actually affecting the connectome, we can start developing treatments that are more precise, more targeted. Imagine being able to spot someone who might be at risk for Alzheimer's early on just by looking at their connectome, or even tailoring treatments for depression based on a person's unique brain wiring.
It sounds like something out of sci-fi, but it's becoming a reality.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we're just scratching the surface, this Frontiers in Neuroscience article. It really digs into the future of this whole field. And let me tell you, the potential is enormous.
But there must be huge challenges too, right? I mean, the brain, it's the most complex structure we know of. And to top it off, each brain is unique. How can researchers even begin to deal with that level of individuality?
You're right. That's one of the biggest hurdles in the field right now. This Science Direct article called it Individual Differences in Connectomes. It basically means that no two brains are wired exactly the same, which makes it incredibly difficult to come up with models that apply to everyone.
It's amazing though, right? Each of our brains, truly one of a kind. And you can see that reflected in these unique wiring diagrams. But this article, it talks about this idea of an individualized connectome. Like having a personalized brain map. Is that even possible?
It's still early stages, but oh man, the possibilities. Just imagine having a personalized map of your own brain. Think how much that could change things. We could understand why people act the way they do, create tailored treatments, even predict if someone might be at risk for certain diseases.
It's mind-boggling, but incredibly exciting too. And the Science Direct article also brought up these really fascinating shifts in how scientists are thinking about the brain. Like instead of seeing the brain as having these distinct compartments, they're looking at the idea of gradient-like subdivisions.
Right. That's a super interesting concept. It challenges that traditional view of the brain having these hard lines between different areas. They're finding that it's more like a spectrum of activity. Things kind of gradually transition from one area to the next.
So less like a file cabinet, more like this, I don't know, a tapestry of interwoven functions. It just goes to show how much we still don't know about the brain.
And that's what makes science so cool. The more we discover, the more we realize we have so much more to learn.
So much to unpack. It really seems like this whole field connectome research, it's just exploding with new discoveries.
Absolutely. Feels like every day we're getting a clearer picture of how our brains are wired, all those intricate connections.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of our deep dive today. We explored this incredible concept of the connectome, that detailed map of the connections in our brains. And we learned that it's not just some static picture, it's this dynamic, always changing system.
Right, and that it's crucial for figuring out not only how our brains work when they're healthy, but also what's going wrong in conditions like Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, and even depression.
We talk about those challenges researchers are facing. I mean, the brain is crazy complex, and each connectome is totally unique.
True, but even with those challenges, the future of connectome research is super exciting. Personalized brain maps, customized treatments, early disease prediction. It's an amazing time to be following this field.
It really is. You've given me a lot to think about. Like, We saw how researchers are using the connectome to get this, actually predict brain activity in flies. What if, and this is a big what if, we could compare connectomes across different species like humans and flies, or even other animals? Could that unlock even bigger secrets about how brains work? Something to ponder.
Wow, that's a really interesting question, and it really highlights just how much more there is to explore in this field.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this incredible deep dive into the world of the connectome. Hopefully, everyone listening is feeling a little more connected to their own brain and to the incredible research that's helping us understand its mysteries. Until next time.